understand the origins of music, we need to go way back to the beginning of time. This story starts from the beginning of mankind on planet Earth. We know that Hazrat Adam alayhi salam and Hawa were looking for one another for many, many years. And once they did finally unite, they decided to have a family. It said that Hawa was pregnant 20 times. On 20 occasions, she gave birth to twins, so a boy and a girl. So therefore, she had 40 children. Now at that time, Sharia dictated that a brother and a sister from the same pregnancy could not marry one another. And the firstborn son was called Qabeel. And a few pregnancies later, his brother Habeel was born. And the origins of this story goes on to revolve around those two brothers. Now, as they grew older, Qabeel was asked to marry the girl from the pregnancy of his brother Habeel, and Habeel was asked to marry the girl from the same pregnancy as Qabeel. Now, Qabeel, he didn't find her attractive. The girl that he wanted to marry was from the same pregnancy as he was from. Now, in Sharia, this was not permissible. So what this did was this drew a lot of jealousy and pride and ego to come out of Qabeel. Now in nature he was arrogant anyway, but what it led him to do was commit the first murder on earth. And this murder was of his brother Habeel. And because he was so ashamed to face up to his father, he decided to run away and set up his own community. Now there is a story about how he murdered his brother. We'll cover that in another video. He was so ashamed of himself once the guilt had kicked in. So what he decided to do was run away and set up his own community. Now at that time, Hazrat Adam alayhi salam had set up a community within the mountains, and there was no one residing on the flat lands. So when Qabeel ran away, he ran away with the girl or the sister that he wanted to marry himself. So he set up camp on the flatlands. So you had two communities now. One was within the mountains, which was Hazrat Adam alayhi salam and his community. And then Qabeel had started to set up his own community on the flatlands. It was well regarded at that time that the women from the flat surfaces were better looking than the women of the mountains. And the men of the mountains were better looking than the men of the flat surfaces. Now Habeel, the brother who had been killed by Qabeel, was very pious and was very dear to Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. And in place of Habeel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Adam alayhi salam a son called Shaitaan, who's also a prophet of Islam. Now being a true leader, Prophet Shaitaan, may Allah Ta'ala be pleased with him, forbid the people of the mountains to mix with the people of the flat surfaces. Now Shaitaan one day disguised himself as a young man and started to teach some of the young men who lived on the flat surfaces how to play musical instruments such as the flutes and the drums. Now bear in mind, the men who lived on the flat surfaces were of weaker iman anyway, and this is one of the traits of the Shaitaan. He attacks those who are vulnerable, those that can be broken quite easily, and he saw that opportunity and he took it. Now the people of the mountains would then hear the people of the flat surfaces playing music, and those that had weaker faith and weaker imans were really sort of taken by music and the sounds. Again, it was something that was new to them. The men and the women of the mountains and the flat surfaces eventually started mixing and having affairs and adultery and fornication and other haram activities. Now, people from Qabeel's community took further advantage and they wanted to do things on a bigger scale. So what they started to do was hold music festivals. Now all of them were starting to become experts in playing the flutes and the drums and other instruments that were available at that time. Now these music festivals were the first ever known to mankind. So this led to a lot of mixing. Those from the mountains started mixing with the women of the flat surfaces, those that were the most steadfast would then be tempted by those who had already been to these music festivals and heard the music and done the dancing and listened to the music and so on. They would go back and tell the people of the mountains that you're missing out. Now we know that today there's a multitude of genres and music's become very common, and it's also part of a multi-billion-dollar industry. However, if you ever wondered where it all started from, now you know. So this is a very brief overview of how people started using music instruments and started creating music festivals for their own gain. Now, it must be pointed out, there are differences of opinions when it comes to music in Islam. So this story I've shared with you is purely for the purposes of explaining the origin of music and how it spread. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, subscribe, and until we meet again, Allah Hafiz.